My name is Clifford Stone. I retired as a Sergeant First Class from the U.S. Army. I was born in Portsmouth, Ohio. I have had an interest in UFOs since I was about 7, 8 years old, when I had my first initial experience that I could readily identify as a UFO event. Prior to that, I had strange things happening to me, which I didn't actually tie those to UFOs, and I didn't tie them to anything of extraterrestrial origin. Actually, I thought of more along the lines of something being supernatural. It scared me, but then I realized there was nothing I could do about it. So from a very early start in life, all the way up to and including the present, I've been involved in UFOs and I had strange events. And people will tell you that if you spend time at my house for any length of time, you will have strange events happen to you. We have attempted to shoot down UFOs in the past, with little effect. We actually shot pieces off, but during that time there were mechanical problems with them. The reason that you cannot go ahead and shoot a UFO down, the reason you don't have no sonic boom, you have 1/4 of an inch of a perfect vacuum all the way around the airframe. You cannot penetrate that vacuum. No weapon known to man can penetrate it. Now, do they have countermeasures where if they were up against a alien craft that was a threat to them that had the same technology, do they have measures where they could go ahead and neutralize it on the enemy spacecraft? I don't know. But I do know that that right there is the one thing that protects them, and also provides for them to travel through our atmosphere at a speed far greater than the speed of sound without breaking the sound barrier. The cases that I was involved in, the 12, 3 actually involved crash retrievals. The 3 crash retrievals had bodies with them, and some of the entities were still alive, which was necessary to treat them, which is why there's the catalog that deals with the various species. The catalog exists because rendering first aid to our visitors is quite unique and different from what we would consider first aid. You had medics there who would go ahead and take care of those people, but they needed that section that dealt with the cataloging and what types of food that they could be fed. Actually, we use I'm going to say the word wrong, but we use synthesized food. We did not give them the food that we normally eat and take for granted every day. It could actually be poisonous to them. First aid, the way we give first aid, could actually cause their death. So we had to know how to administer specifically the things that was needed to preserve their life, if at all possible. The other thing is, when you went to a crash retrieval, you always was going against the clock, because just like us, when we have a plane go down, there's an emergency beacon sent out. When one of their craft go down, there is an emergency distress call that goes out to their people, and immediately they try to recover them. And on more than one occasion, the military and their people have gotten there at the same time. The best thing to do when that happens is for us to back off, because they are going to do everything they can to protect their people and recover the bodies and recover any of the injured or those that are still alive. They're not going to try to take overt hostile acts towards us. Many of the species, on an individual basis, would permit themselves to be killed before they would have any of us hurt. Not all the species are that way, but many are. the self-preservation that we have isn't the same with them. That doesn't mean they want to die. Doesn't mean that they don't feel fear just like we do. And I can tell you they feel fear. I can tell you they really feel fear at times. And it shouldn't be that way with us. It should be that they know that we want to help them, but then again, the greed of man comes into play. What they have, we want. And the only way we can get it, we must learn from them. And if it means going through interrogation, things of this sort, and doing unethical things, because there aren't any laws that protect them. Your pet retriever has more rights than any ET has. Knowing that, that is one of the reasons we're in quarantine. There is nothing that would stop us if we were to become, in the matter of the next couple of years, interplanetary travelers, meaning visiting other solar systems. If we achieve that, and we go to a place that's got life very similar to the life here on Earth, and even an sentient, intelligent life that is on par to man but looks a little different, we could do anything we wanted to there in the interest of furthering our scientific knowledge and not even think about the moral issues of what we're doing to the life on that planet. The only thought we would have is the precautions we needed to take to ensure when we left that planet, we did not come back here and infect our planet with a very deadly disease. That's been in place since actually before the crash here in Roswell. That was in place during the Second World War, because it was during the Second World War that in the Pacific Theater that they came into possession of things that were of extraterrestrial origin. And if you're not very careful when you go to a crash site, you run into the possibility of having casualties. Not because they're hostile, but because you have to be very careful with the equipment that they have on board the craft. The great art of reading, it's dead. People want to be told this is the truth. The one message that I cry out all the time, let nobody live in your mind rent-free. Make sure of these things. Read. In my case, I always allude to the documentation. And I'm always being told people don't want to read the documentation. What do the people want then? Do they want to go ahead and hide their head in the sand like an ostrich? Or do they want to be enlightened by the sun that is shining bright in day? One, you can have somebody tell you these are the facts. That doesn't make it so. You can get the documents that have the pedigree, that paint a story, that show that something is going on. Then how that interrelates with your life, to what degree of experiences have you had, then you put those together. But first you search out the truth. Then when you find out that you have had things happen in your life, or if you already know you were involved with these things, you owe it to your family and to yourself to tell them what happened in your life, why you weren't there for that ball game, why you weren't there for maybe the first steps of your child, maybe at the time of the birth of your child, but the times that you weren't there because you were out in the service of your country and it was things you were never to talk about. Now that you're out, you want to live a normal life, so you're never going to bring it up. But it's eating at you from within, inside. it's also eating away at your family. You need to let them know what really happened. The initial situation was at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. We went there on a field training exercise. Being a civil affairs unit, they had certain scenarios they had to play out. Well, while we were there at that particular location, we were notified that there was an NBC incident that occurred and that a plane went down and it had radiological equipment on it, or radiological weapons. So we had to move out. There was already a team there when we got there, and they had everything set up. But once we got there and upon our arrival, as we got closer and closer to the mound of Earth, we could see that there was an aircraft there. But none of us could identify what the craft was. I drove a Deuce and a Half because the Deuce and a Half had all my field equipment, the radios, the switchboard, the NBC equipment. Upon getting there, they went ahead and told me that, they wanted me to go towards the object itself and take radiological readings. I went towards it, and as I got closer and closer, the readings would go up, but then they'd go down, up, down. I now know why that happened. It's the propulsion system. The propulsion system they use will initially give off a lot of background radiation, but it dissipates in a matter of minutes. But they wanted me to go ahead and get as close to the object as I could. So I kept going, and I got up to where I could look down into the mound where it was at. The craft was like a hill shape, and they had a canopy, but on each side of the canopy, and the only way I can describe it is like a kidney-shaped hatch that was open, and there was a body lying out there, and you could immediately tell it wasn't human. I started to call for an officer because I needed an officer to come there to see what I was seeing. This wasn't real. This wasn't something that was supposed to be happening. And they told me, no, just describe what you're seeing. And I said, no, I really need an officer up here. I said, you don't understand. I really need an officer up here. No one came. Eventually, they said, that's fine, send someone back down. Then they told me to go back into the Deuce and a Half. That some field phones had already been set up from there. I would operate the switchboard at SP-22. And I was to stay there until I was later notified to come out. That all rations of the day would be C rations, and there were C rations in the truck. I wasn't to look out of the truck or nothing else from that point on. So that was the initial start. And from there on, there were other events that occurred. A lot of people think that you're in a unit just waiting for the next UFO event. That's not it. You actually had a real job you did in the military, but you had a double life. And on more than one occasion, we had situations where we were called out. There in the United States, I had several. In Germany, I had several, which covered all of Europe. In Vietnam, we had several incidences. But I think the biggest thing about going on these events was you couldn't talk to nobody. You had to keep it bottled up. You couldn't tell your family what you were doing. Being a clerk, I shouldn't go all that TDY. I shouldn't be gone for weeks, months at a time. My kids, they didn't understand that. And just this last month, I went on vacation. My two sons were throwing it up to me about, Dad, you missed out on a lot of vacations with us. And I tried to explain to them it wasn't because I didn't want to be there. but I've already told them events that happened. And my oldest son started to recall what I had said prior with the death of my son in 95, because then I started to tell them. My granddaughter, I think I've told the most to because she asked. And she really took an interest in what I was saying about what happened. But I think people that were involved in this, the people who went out there and did the recoveries, who've seen the things that they have to live with day to day, they really need to tell their families. I got disillusioned with it when I found out the things we were doing to people. I got disillusioned with it when I found out, knowing the truth, we would cause people to lose their families, lose their jobs, and at times they would even take their lives. And to me, there was nothing right about this. What purpose can it serve by telling these people who've had these events, who actually were the response people who went to these locations where these events took place, to try to tell them that there's a prosaic explanation when they knew better? But the end result, they're traumatized and there isn't no help out there. If you go and tell somebody about a UFO event or experience you had, immediately your sanity comes into question. Immediately, people question your integrity. And that's what these people have to deal with. So what do? You bottle it up and you say nothing. That's the safe thing. But it really isn't safe because it comes back to haunt you. So right now what I would like is for people who have been out there, who have been involved in this, to tell their families what they were involved with. I had an officer, and a lot of you people in the field know him. When I talked in Washington, D.C., he was involved in an incident. He came up and he asked me, how did they talk? I said, you heard them in your head. I said, it was just like you and I talking right now. And you thought you were hearing voices, but you heard them in your head. And I told him that during the event that you went through, you probably heard them say something like, do not be afraid, we are not going to harm you. Nothing bad is going to happen. But it is necessary we show what we could do if we were really here with hostile intent. He acknowledged that. He never told anybody, no one, about that, not even his family. And he acknowledged, yes, that's exactly what happened, and I've never told no one. And I said, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I'm going to go home, hug my wife, tell her I love her, and tell her what happened. And to the best of my knowledge, there's a couple of people who in the field that know about that, but they've never breached the name of that person. And that's the way it needs to be. It's up to that individual to come forth and tell what really happened, the rest of the story. I tell you I've seen a UFO. I tell you that we made a report about it, that certain things happened. I can be comfortable with that. And you can accept that, whether you believe in extraterrestrials or not. But when I tell you the rest of the story, then it becomes very difficult for the person to really comprehend what a person went through. Also, it becomes very difficult for the person who has decided to come out of the closet, so to speak, and state that for 20 plus years I was involved in a program involving the recovery of crashed UFOs and debris thereof. Crashes are very rare, very rare. The recovery of debris or items left behind are not so rare. To be sure, they're pretty common. person that's involved in an incident one time, as this person was, it becomes very difficult for them to tell the whole story, even when they want to. But there are those, in order to have peace of mind, starting with family, they need to tell. And I guess that's the message I want to get out. I have been face to face with visitors from other planets other than here. I had one that's very, very close. Like I say, it stays with me. That individual is called Corona, and it was made clear, always spell it with a K. I don't know what difference it makes, but I was told my name is Corona with a K. So that little entity, it's about 4.5, 5 foot tall. A lot of people tell me, well, can't you make him gray? No, I can't. He has a greenish tint to him. He has a very unique feature of his face where the skull is larger out here, then it comes into a smaller cheek. The eyes are like teardrop, but with the top of the teardrop toward the inside slanted a little like this. 2 small slits for a nose and a slit for a mouth. Lips are not dominant or anything like that on this particular entity. But yet, you can see emotion within his face. And I say him because during the times that we have had interaction, we've even talked about family situations. Most often, we don't go ahead and think of them being anything like us to where they have families. We think of them as being genetically created. There's no longer that bonding between the female and the male of the species. Well, there is love there. It's not something that is missing from their society. They work towards the common good of their society. Unlike us, where a lot of times we are pulling at one another. There's competition, but the competition is working towards the common good, not who can do the best job better. And it's so hard to put into words. It's almost like a beehive. All the bees in a beehive will work towards the common good of the colony within that hive. They do have their rogue elements, but when that happens, they are either extracted or killed within a beehive. In this case, they will refer to there being rogue elements that may be indifferent to the feelings of any other living creatures. When I was in the program, we were always told not all contact will be of a friendly nature. Now, the only time I've seen it where it wasn't of a friendly nature was when we were the ones that initiated the aggression. And it's very human to come up on something that shocks your psychic, that shatters everything that you once believed, and react hostile to that stimulus. And that has happened. Right now, we don't shoot at UFOs. We have chase planes, but they have the little crosshairs. In the past, when we chased planes and we tried to take gun camera footage, when you activated your gun camera, all of your weapons were ready to fire on whatever it is that you were taking the photograph of. That can be registered. We can do that. We can say, okay, this person, for whatever reason, is getting a lock on us. And we don't know whether he's shooting at us with a camera or he's getting ready to unload missiles on us. So that's considered a hostile act, even by our standard. What we do nowadays is that we use the crosshairs where the pilot can go ahead, hit up on the crosshairs, whatever he's seeing in the center of the crosshairs, that's the center of what's going to show up in the gun camera footage. It doesn't go through any weapon system. Therefore, no hostile act can be registered or even be determined to be of such nature. The Russians have yet to learn this. The Russians have lost, by the time I got out, they'd lost 27 aircraft in the attempt to shoot down a UFO. The Chinese are getting a sad lesson on it now. They will shoot at anything that comes into their airspace. Now, it's not because they are taking defensive actions where they're shooting these planes down. It's just that sometimes when they use their defensive system, it has an adverse impact on the aircraft fighters trying to shoot them down. But what happens is they bring these people into the programs, and then they find a whole new world opening up to them. And it's a very scary world, a very lonely world. It's a world you can't share with nobody. Now, there is a school, and they will send you to that school. I always fought not to go to that school, because when I met the people who came back from that school, they were different. They were cold, they were callous. They didn't really care about what happened to certain other people, that people that they had to go and talk to, that these people, they were just numbers. They were a mission to make sure that they didn't talk. And whatever happened to the people, that was not a problem of theirs. That wasn't a concern. They wound up killing themselves or start having mental problems. Then they would joke about it. And I thought, this is a horrific thing that we're doing, that it shouldn't be that way. And ultimately, one case right here out of New Mexico, where they drove the person insane. And I kept trying to talk to the person, look, don't go down that road. But he trusted the very people that he knew were government agents not to cause that to happen, and trusted them emphatically. And at least one government agent feels pretty badly about what they did to that person. And everyone should. In short, we should be telling the people the truth, that these people aren't crazy. They're having, from one degree to another, some type of interaction with our visitors. And we got people out there right now, John Q. Public, that has things bottled up in them. And I mean, this is a large number that have had interaction with our visitors to a more or less degree of some sort, who have actually blotted it out of their memory. But they need to know what really happened, and when they start thinking about it, they don't really know where to go and search out answers. I can remember seeing the sky, the night sky, filled with stars. Yet, I don't remember it happening before or since. But I do know that I have been in many deserts, many dark areas, on clear, crystal clear nights, in which I could see many stars, but nothing like a couple of events in my life. And the only thing I could say was, part of that I'm blocking out. I have to be blocking it out. Because the only way you could have seen all those stars is from a vantage point where you were not on this planet. That being said, I have no recollection of ever being abducted. I have no recollection of ever being taken into space in one of their craft. But yet, I have clear memory of seeing the sky as I was awed at it. But I can't explain why I have that clear memory. Don't know what was happening at that time. All I can say for sure, I was standing on level land. There were other things in my life that I have memory of that don't quite make sense. But when you go ahead and take into consideration the interaction that I know I've had with our visitors, and also know that it's a learning process, then we need to understand a little bit more about the relationship with our visitors and ourselves. Because through me, I don't have to be a genius, but everything I know, they know. Everything I see, they see. If you were over to my house, you would see thousands of CDs. The CDs have documents on them. A lot of subjects. Military subjects, space subjects, SDI, UFOs, but UFOs is just part of it. When I go ahead and download those, I'll scan them. I'm not even necessarily reading them. But I know as I scan those, they are picking up on what's there. So whether I have memory of everything that I've seen in the documents, they have memory of everything. And somehow, some way, using me, they can record that information and save it for prosperity. They also learn from that information, but they learn from us throughout life. If you're selected for them to, for lack of a better term, study, it starts at an early age, and they live long enough to mourn your death. And there's a reason I say mourn your death, because there's that relationship. It's hard to explain. It's not like your best friend or something like that, but there is that relationship. And that relationship is more human than what most people would think. But it's also with our visitors. It's hard to explain. It's hard to put into words. You're okay if you don't drudge it back up. But I have friends that are telling me I need to drudge it back up one time. But I feel so silly because you can't hold the emotion back. And I have at times found myself wishing I could hate everyone and everything. And that way I wouldn't feel the compulsion to try to do something. And I know that's the wrong way to feel about it. But I can't hate. Even if I was to try to, I couldn't do that. I can't get angry with a person and stay angry with that person. I can get angry at a situation. I can feel frustration about a person's deportment or something like that. But I cannot go ahead and get angry, hold malice toward any individual. I guess it's just a situation where how do you stop it? How do you stop what's going on? How do you get it out there without the hard evidence to let people know these things are going on? I do know that UFO sightings really are, whether they're reported to the media or they're reported anyplace else, UFO sightings are on an increase. Now, in the 50s and 60s, people would report lights in the night sky. Unless there is an event of real high strangeness, people don't report these incidences anymore. Once again, even in today's world, if you have an incident of high strangeness, you have the tendency not to report it. But I would suggest there's more going on than person just being within 500 foot of a circular craft or an unusual craft. There's more going on than that person just seeing that craft and a strange-looking being next to it, or looking up and seeing a craft and see a strange-looking being looking out, for lack of a better term, what they call a window. There's some segment there that's missing that they don't have full understanding of. But it will visit them at nights because they will have nightmares about it. And they won't understand the nightmares. They will be trying to find answers to certain questions that have come up to them, not understanding the connection to the sighting. So there's more interaction going on than what people really know. And it's going on with a large number of people. And I guess what I'm saying is, we really need to get those people to start talking. And it's not just generic to the military, and the military doesn't have a handle on that. And it's not just generic to the U.S., it's worldwide. The government's covering up the knowledge that they have that some UFOs are in fact interplanetary spacecraft, are interdimensional, multidimensional craft. Both can be one and the same. But we have a sentient life, much more evolved, much more intelligent than we are, that are visiting our planet. And we're keeping this information from the public. The problem with that is that there is no way any government on the earth can stop that interaction with these visitors to our planet with the people of our planet. For example, the reason they used me as an interfacer was because of the events that happened in my childhood and in my teen years. And somehow, some way, they knew about it. They can't teach this in school. They have to find people in the civilian sector to bring in to the fold, so to speak. I know for a fact that our government, along with other governments, have some type of social intercourse with our visitors. But at the same time, I know that our visitors are partially responsible for why full disclosure has not taken place yet. And that's easily proven. Given that they are here, what power on earth could stop them from making themselves known if they wanted to? That being said, I feel that governments need to find a responsible way to start getting the information out that we are not alone in the universe, that there is other life out there, and that life is coming here visiting our planet. And it's for pure scientific purposes, to try to gain a better understanding of us and hopefully enlighten us to the point where at sometime in the future we don't wind up destroying ourselves. as a child, I had the situation where I'd have playmates that were invisible. Well, everybody has those, right? Everybody has imaginary friends. Only this was more than that. They wasn't imaginary. They were real to me. And they would always caution me. Be careful what you say about us. Others can't see us. But they looked very human. At the time, I was always trying to help little animals. If I found an animal hurt, I'd try to nurse it back. I found a little bird once. It had fallen out of its nest. And I took the bird, and it had broken its beak. So I took the bird and held it under a faucet, trying to wash away the blood, trying to help it. Of course, I drowned it. Now, in a child's mind, they don't understand that birds die, and God in his infinite wisdom doesn't have a grieving process like we humans have when we lose a loved one. To me, I murdered that little bird. The mother and father are going to be missing their little baby, all because of an action I did. And it really bothered me. I mean, I cried for weeks over that bird. But then, first time I see Corona, as he really is, he appears and he's startled. He wants to know why he's feeling what he is feeling. Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Because as a result of what I'm feeling, he's feeling it. And I mean, the response wasn't there. I screamed, and I ran to try to find a place to hide. The question stood, why? Why did I feel that way? I couldn't explain why I felt that way. After I overcame my panic, and that's what you would have to call it, because my aunt couldn't even control me. She tried to keep me in a chair, and I wanted to get out of that chair. I wanted to find a place to hide, but there was no place to hide. Where do you hide? Where do you run to? But the question, why do you feel this way? Why is it that this bird died? Why do you feel such heavy grief, such heavy pain over doing that? Then the other thing was, why do you try not to cry? Is crying not natural for your species? I'm a kid, I can't answer those questions. But, eventually, the thought process, they were picking up on the fact that I was identifying this bird in human contents, i.e. the taking the life of a child. Knowing firsthand, now, at the time I didn't. I could only imagine. But knowing firsthand now, I can even understand a little better. But to me, the bird had a mother and father. The mother and father's going to miss that bird, their baby. And these were the emotions that was inside of me. When my son passed away, Corona, I think, mourned with me. And I always, even today, I visit his grave. But one day I was praying and Corona said, "Do you mind if I pray with you?" And I said, "Not a problem, pray in your own way." And he got down on his knees just like we did. And people hate this part of it. But I said, "Do you have religion?" And they said, "Religion? Isn't that something that's created by man? Do we have faith?" Yes, we have faith. Do we believe that there is that which you call God? We accept that based on our science. It's no longer a faith-based idea that there is a creator, that which you call God. That truly is. Do you believe in life after death? Yes, they do. They even have means to communicate with their loved ones. It's not some parlor trick. They really have the means to do it. But there are forbidden questions that you can't ask about what happens after death. Otherwise, you ask that, you're cut off immediately. The one thing they cannot tell you, they cannot come up and tell you that this religion is the true and correct religion, or that religion is true and correct religion. You must worship in your own way. And at this time, I don't really go into why that was such a crucial question that I really needed answers for. And it deals with a document that was out there that tied in with the connection with my son's death and what this document was alluding to. It was causing me a lot of mental anguish. Yet the answers was not offered. In short, I had to ask the questions. But it was brought about by the point of, why don't you ask these certain questions? It wasn't, well, we know what you want to know, so here's what the answers are. So it was played out, so to speak. And it was over a period of several days. And they even permitted me to see my son. I don't want to talk about that right now, but someday I really need to get that out. Because there were 2 times that happened. And they're really beautiful stories, I think. But very hard for me to tell. Well, initially when I tried to enlist in the military, I was found 4F. I went to Fort Hays in Columbus, Ohio for my examination to go into the military. And that was in December 1967. Once I was there and I took all the tests, passed all the tests with flying colors, but they found some medical problems and they said, you're never going to get in the military. At that time, they had the draft going on. I left Asheville, Ohio, and moved back down to Portsmouth, Ohio. And once I got back down to Portsmouth, Ohio, in late June, I received a letter directing me to report to Ashland, Kentucky for reevaluation. And of course, I knew it made no difference. I wasn't going to get in. But when I got there, didn't lie on the form or nothing. But there was an officer there, a medical officer, who said, do you really want to in? Of course I did. At that time, I was very patriotic. It was God, country, mom's apple pie. If my country was doing something, it was okayed by God. That's the way I felt about it. But I managed to get in. The officer told me, he says, well, anytime you want out, all you have to do is tell him about your medical problems. And I said, you get me in, I'm not getting out. So once I got in, I went through basic, I went through AIT, got my first duty assignment. But initially going through basic, nothing really happened other than just basic training. When I went to AIT, I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Their intelligence office there, they would send students that was taking schools there, they'd send them over to different places for work detail. On the 4th day of being there, I was sent to the intelligence office to do cleanup in there, empty the trash cans, mop the floors, buff them out, wax them. There was one gentleman there that was there on special assignment from Washington, and we started to talk. When we started to talk, he started to show me things. And some of the things he showed me was photographs, some documents, and I knew what top secret meant at the time. I also knew I shouldn't be seeing them because I didn't have a top secret clearance. There were words that was past the top secret, and I didn't understand what those words were at the time. I didn't understand in parentheses at the beginning of every paragraph what that was all about. But I did know top secret. I did know I wasn't supposed to be seeing these. And initially he asked me, how do you feel about UFOs? Well, my mom didn't raise any fools, so I knew that military and UFOs didn't mix. So I said, I don't give it much thought. And he laughed and says, come on, I don't really believe that. Everybody thinks about them. And I said, no, sir. And I said, I don't even think we should be carrying on this conversation. He says, well, let me show you some stuff. Then he showed me, and I said, sir, are you sure you should be showing me this? And he says, nope. I says, yes, I know I shouldn't be showing it to you, but you need to see it. I said, well, we could get in trouble, and I don't think I should look at it. And he said, okay, back up, regroup. I'm not showing you anything I'm not supposed to. You will understand later on. But I started to spend a lot of time doing this stuff, but I never went to class. I never typed on a typewriter while I was there at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Yet when I got out, they said I could type 73 words a minute. When I went to my first duty station, which was at Fort Lee, Virginia, 36 Civil Affairs, I proudly advised my first sergeant that the one thing he should know about me, since I was a clerk typist, I couldn't type. And he looked at me kind of strange, and I was going through my record, says, yeah, and obviously don't know the difference between the branches of service. Now, I didn't understand what he meant by that, but he took my records, went in to see the unit commander. The unit commander came out, and he said, are you colorblind? And I said, no, sir. He says, what color uniform you have on? I said, green, sir. He said, okay. And that's all that was ever said. And the first sergeant says, well, we have to put you someplace. He says, we need a unit NBC NCO. How would you like to be the unit NBC NCO? And that stands for Nuclear, Biological, Chemical Warfare. So I said, sure, I wouldn't mind doing that. He said, it requires no typing, which wasn't actually true. It did. So what little typing it was required, I could hunt and peck on the typewriter. And I had an old Remington typewriter. They didn't have the electric typewriters at that time. So I went ahead, got that position, but in order to be in that position, you had to go to school. And the school lasted 3 weeks. So I was sent TDY to Fort McCollum, Alabama. Once I got to Fort McCollum, Alabama, I went, completed my school, and then came back to my unit. Once I got back to my unit, 36 Civil Affairs, while I was at Fort McCollum, I met a friend of mine we hung around together all the time, and he was Army ASA, Army's security agency, and he was stationed out of Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and he was directly assigned to the NSA. Anyhow, he invited me to come down to visit with him sometime, and I said, sure, I'll try to do that. Anyhow, getting back to where I go back to my unit, I went to my unit, started to set up my office inside the NBC room. I also had the requirement of taking care of our communications equipment, like the switchboard, the field phones, the Prick 25s, which were field radios, the Prick 46s, which were vehicle-mounted radios. And in the process of doing that, I was assigned to what was called an NBC Quick Reaction Team. Now, these were all over the United States. Nothing mystique about them, other than what their assignment is. Should there be an NBC incident or event, then you would go ahead and have one of these teams move out. And they had to move out in such a way that they had two different teams. Even today, it's the same way. They had A team and B team. A team would move out and had to be on location within 2 hours. B team, which was the backup team, had to be there within 4. So I'd be put on alert status when we would be called up to do it, and each unit would provide for that. One day, there was a requirement that the NBC officers go to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to go ahead and get some additional training. So I drove our OIC, which is officer in charge of our team, to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Upon arriving at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, there was this old theater-like, and all the officers went in there. We stayed on the outside, the drivers did. Long about chow time, the drivers decided they were going to go to the snack bar. I didn't have a whole lot of money at that time because I sent most of my money back to my mother. But I made some sandwiches and stuff of this sort and took with me so I'd have something to eat, And there was an airman there. And with both of us being there, we decided, well, let's go inside, see if we can find a place to eat. Both of us went inside. There were no heavily armed guards, which everyone says that seems strange, and I admit it seems strange. But we went in with no problem. We saw this stairway leading up to the balcony, so we thought we'd go on up there because the officers were still in the auditorium. So we thought we'd just go up there and sit and eat. So we went on upstairs. We looked out. When we looked out, they were showing movies. And the film they were showing showed a typical UFOs, a typical different types of aliens, both dead and alive. The movie was made up of both stills and film footage. And we first thought, well, they're watching science fiction trailers. And it was kind of like levity put into some serious subject, we thought. So while we watched what was going on, we tried to identify the movies, because both of us thought we had seen quite a few sci-fi movies. But we couldn't identify the movies from which the film clips were from. Then all of a sudden we realized we wasn't alone in the room. We went ahead, was escorted out, actually pushed most of the time down the stairs. And they kept telling us, do we have any understanding or idea what kind of trouble we were in? They had a panel van on the outside, meaning it had no windows or nothing. They put us inside of that, pushed us inside of that panel van. Did not have no lights on, it was total dark back there. Drove us to an undisclosed location. And I don't want to get into it at this time, but for 4 nights and 5 days with me, I was put through what they call intensified interrogation. The airman, he got out of it a little earlier. When I got back to my unit, we were both told never to say anything about what happened to anyone. When I got back to my unit, it was on a Friday night. The only thing I wanted to do was get some sleep. So I went to bed. Saturday morning, I was woke up by the CQ, charge of quarters, and he directed me to go down to the first sergeant's office, that I was needed there in the orderly room. So I went on to the orderly room, went to the first sergeant's office, and the first sergeant wasn't there. Then I was called in the unit commander's office. When I went back there, the 2 gentlemen that were doing the intensified interrogation, they were there. So they went ahead and asked me what happened for the week. And I said, what do you mean? Well, you were AWOL for a week. And I said, no, sir, I was not AWOL. What were you doing? I was following orders. And these were the same 2 people that put me through the interrogation. And they said, no, you were not here for the week. I said, I wasn't here, but I was following orders. And they said, okay, are you going to tell us where you were at or not? So I was wondering what was going on, so I uttered something to the effect that, you know what happened, you were there. Then one of them went really ballistic, for lack of a better term. And he went ahead and said, I told you we should have shot him. I told you we should have not let him just leave there. And he even pulled out a weapon and said, I say we just shoot him right now to ensure he keeps quiet. We'll call it a training accident. Well, what happened was the other guy said, calm down, go get us some sandwiches and coffee. So he went out ranting and raving as he went out. So finally he went ahead, the guy that stayed behind, and now I'd call it the good cop, bad cop routine. He went ahead and was talking to me and says, look, you know that UFOs are real. You have had experiences, and your country needs to utilize you in those experiences. We want to make you a part of a team which isn't put together. It's loosely knit. You do your job here, but in the event of a UFO event or incident within this location, you would be utilized. Now, if you're willing to do that, we'll go ahead and forget about the AWOL. If you're willing to do that, you will be made to understand certain things that we know, but you will also be in a position to learn a whole lot more. And it makes no real difference. By the end of the year, the truth is going to come out anyhow. Well, they were talking about the Condon Committee report. At the end of the year, it came out, but did not say anything about the reality of UFOs. By the end of the year, I knew what our government was doing. But initially I said, well, no, I really don't want to do this. And they went ahead and said, well, we'd like for you to change your mind because you could be court-martialed for that, for the AWOL. Says the one thing you can really be court-martialed for is that you're in the wrong branch of service. Well, I was just a young kid at that time. And I couldn't understand what do you mean, the wrong branch of service. And he gave me my enlistment contract. He says, what does it say here you enlisted in? I said, it says Army. He says, read it. I said, I've been in the Army for what, 8 months now? And he says, read it. The oath has United States Air Force. The front of the DDD Form 4, on the very first page, said that I had read and understood Air Force Form 117. I wasn't in the Air Force, I was in the Army. So they were making it as though that this was a terrible breach of my contract, and that I'd cost the U.S. taxpayer a lot of money. Now all I had to do was re-enlist for 3 years, go ahead, do what they wanted me to do, and play ball with the program. And I would be able to go ahead and to have my records changed where it said Army. There would be no charges brought up against me. And I was told I had till Monday to make the decision. Monday morning, one of two things would happen. I would be hit up on charges. Charge sheets would be drawn up, and an Article 32 investigation pursued, which was an investigation to determine if there was sufficient evidence to take you to trial. And I was appraised of the fact there was sufficient evidence to take me to trial. So after they hit up on that for the weekend, I still felt uncomfortable re-enlisting. But I decided, fine, I'd do it. So I re-enlisted. And it wasn't a choice. Monday morning, I re-enlisted. End of discussion. They had the paperwork already done. And they were pretty sure I was going to. That's why they had the paperwork done. But I went ahead, took my re-enlistment, got that, and nothing happened for some time. Then we had a situation where the initial situation was at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. We went there on a field training exercise. Being a civil affairs unit, they had certain scenarios they had to play out. Well, while we were there at that particular location, we were notified that there was an NBC incident that occurred, and that a plane went down and it had radiological equipment on it, or radiological weapons. So we had to move out. There was already a team there when we got there, and they had everything set up. But once we got there and upon our arrival, as we got closer and closer to the mound of Earth, we could see that there was an aircraft there. But none of us could identify what the craft was. I drove a Deuce and a Half because the Deuce and a Half had all my field equipment, the radios, the switchboard, the NBC equipment. Upon getting there, they went ahead and told me that, they wanted me to go towards the object itself and take radiological readings. I went towards it, and as I got closer and closer, the readings would go up, but then they'd go down, up, down. I now know why that happened. It's the propulsion system. The propulsion system they use will initially give off a lot of background radiation, but it dissipates in a matter of minutes. But they wanted me to go ahead and get as close to the object as I could. So I kept going, and I got up to where I could look down into the mound where it was at. The craft was like a hill shape, and they had a canopy, but on each side of the canopy, and the only way I can describe it is like a kidney-shaped hatch that was open, and there was a body lying out there, and you could immediately tell it wasn't human. I started to call for an officer because I needed an officer to come there to see what I was seeing. This wasn't real. This wasn't something that was supposed to be happening. And they told me, no, just describe what you're seeing. And I said, no, I really need an officer up here. I said, you don't understand. I really need an officer up here. No one came. Eventually, they said, that's fine, son, come on back down. Then they told me to go back into the deuce and a half. That some field phones had already been set up from there. I would operate the switchboard at SP-22. And I was to stay there until I was later notified to come out. That all rations of the day would be C rations, and there were C rations in the truck. I wasn't to look out of the truck or nothing else from that point on. So that was the initial start. And from there on, there were other events that occurred. A lot of people think that you're in a unit just waiting for the next UFO event. That's not it. You actually had a real job you did in the military, but you had a double life. And on more than one occasion, we had situations where we were called out. There in the United States, I had several. In Germany, I had several, which covered all of Europe. In Vietnam, we had several incidences. But I think the biggest thing about going on these events was you couldn't talk to nobody. You had to keep it bottled up. You couldn't tell your family what you were doing. Being a clerk, I shouldn't go all that TDY. I shouldn't be gone for weeks, months at a time. My kids, they didn't understand that. And just this last month, I went on vacation, and my two sons were throwing it up to me about, Dad, you missed out on a lot of vacations with us. And I tried to explain to them it wasn't because I didn't want to be there. But I've already told them events that happened. And my oldest son started to recall what I had said prior with the death of my son in 95, because then I started to tell them. My granddaughter, I think I've told the most to because she asked. And she really took an interest in what I was saying about what happened. But I think people that were involved in this, the people who went out there and did the recoveries, who've seen the things that they have to live with day to day, they really need to tell their families. I got disillusioned with it when I found out the things we were doing to people. I got disillusioned with it when I found out, knowing the truth, we would cause people to lose their families, lose their jobs, and at times they would even take their lives. And to me, there was nothing right about this. What purpose can it serve by telling these people who've had these events, who actually were the response people who went to these locations where these events took place, to try to tell them that there's a prosaic explanation when they knew better? But the end result, they're traumatized and there isn't no help out there. If you go and tell somebody about a UFO event or experience you had, immediately your sanity comes into question. Immediately, people question your integrity. And that's what these people have to deal with. So what do? You bottle it up and you say nothing. That's the safe thing. But it really isn't safe. because it comes back to haunt you. So right now what I would like is for people who have been out there, who have been involved in this, to tell their families what they were involved with. I had an officer, and a lot of you people in the field know him. When I talked in Washington, D.C., he was involved in an incident. He came up and he asked me, how did they talk? I said, you heard them in your head. I said, it was just like you and I talking right now. And you thought you were hearing voices, but you heard them in your head. And I told him that during the event that you went through, you probably heard them say something like, do not be afraid, we are not going to harm you. Nothing bad is going to happen. But it is necessary we show what we could do if we were really here with hostile intent. He acknowledged that. He never told anybody, no one, about that, not even his family. And he acknowledged, yes, that's exactly what happened, and I've never told no one. And I said, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I'm going to go home, hug my wife, tell her I love her, and tell her what happened. And to the best of my knowledge, there's a couple of people who in the field that know about that, but they've never reached the name of that person. And that's the way it needs to be. It's up to that individual to come forth and tell what really happened, the rest of the story. I tell you I've seen a UFO. I tell you that we made a report about it, that certain things happened. I can be comfortable with that. And you can accept that, whether you believe in extraterrestrials or not. But when I tell you the rest of the story, then it becomes very difficult for the person to really comprehend what a person went through. Also, it becomes very difficult for the person who has decided to come out of the closet, so to speak, and state that for 20 plus years I was involved in a program involving the recovery of crashed UFOs and debris thereof. Crashes are very rare, very rare. The recovery of debris or items left behind are not so rare. To be sure, they're pretty common. A person that's involved in an incident one time, as this person was, it becomes very difficult for them to tell the whole story, even when they want to. But there are those, in order to have peace of mind, starting with family, they need to tell. And I guess that's the message I want to get out. If we keep going in the direction we're going in, we ultimately are going to fall victim to our own technology and ultimately destroy ourselves. Either you go spiritually with your technology, or you fall victim to it. Here it is, we say the Cold War's over, the threat of nuclear exchange is behind us, but we've already fallen victim because terrorists are thinking about using dirty bombs. The greed of man provides the materials to do that. The desire to not have secrets, have it on the internet on how you can make a dirty bomb. So it's not the governments anymore that is in total charge of that awesome technology. They can't do as good at it as organized governments can in laboratories, making all the nice nuclear weapons and all the nice ballistic missiles as delivery systems. But they can make crude weapons. And I would remind everybody that a Stone Age spear can kill you just as easy as an AR-15 can today. So it doesn't have to be a highly sophisticated device, nuclear device, which would be a dirty bomb. But you would also have the aftermath of it going off. We really need to get to the point where we start to become more spiritual in our involvement with one another. We have to care what happens to one another. And I'm not talking religion here. I'm talking about what's in every person. There's that drive to really want to care what happens to other people. There is that adage, once we go ahead and get to that spiritual plateau where we can really apply it within our lives, that there but for the grace of God go I. And if we get to the point where we really want to go ahead and be concerned about the other person, this world's going to be a much, much better world to live in. Until that happens, we are a world in quarantine. We will be able to explore our own little solar system. We will be able to look beyond the envelope. But we won't be able to go out and explore the cosmos. We will fall victim to our technology long before that happens, unless we grow spiritually. If we grow spiritually, the day isn't too awful far off then that we will be going into the cosmos. We will be visiting other worlds. At some point, we will be the aliens, and we will be someone else's UFOs. Well, upon my arrival in Roswell, New Mexico, I was assigned to the ROTC unit here at NEMI. Some of the people that was over me did not like the idea that I was involved in UFOs. So they gave me what they called a lawful order not to go ahead, filled FOIA acts for information, not to correspond with senators, not to go ahead and correspond with anybody in any type of government agency dealing with UFOs or requesting information on UFOs. I considered that an illegal order, so I continued to do it. The end result was they went ahead, they relieved me of my duty, they forced me to undergo a psychological evaluation, which, dare I say, I came through it with flying colors. The one nice thing about it was they said, guy's not crazy. If he's done something he should be court-martialed for, by all means court-martial him. They tried to go ahead and force me to retire. Then they wanted to go ahead and process a disciplinary discharge on me. I resisted all of that. At one point, my executive officer called me into his office and said, okay, you're going to tell me everything you know about UFOs. We're not leaving till you do. I said, well, sir, do you mind if I smoke? If I smoke? And he said, no, go right ahead. It's time I smoke cigars. So I lit up a cigar. And he says, okay, you ready to talk? I said, you going to call your wife, sir? And he said, why do I need to call my wife? I said, because, sir, if you're waiting for me to tell you anything, it's going to be a cold day in hell, and we're going to be here for a long time. This is information your wife should know. He then went ahead and said, well, I'm not mad at you. I just don't think you should be doing this. And besides, what difference does it make to you if the Pentagon has 50 flying saucers of extraterrestrial origin? At which time I told him, sir, you have the luxury of not knowing the truth. Unfortunately, I do not share that same luxury.
You tell the difference between a man-made vehicle and an extraterrestrial vehicle. It is at the point now that it is seamless. It's almost impossible to tell who's who. But 2 points I want to point out. If you hear about a vehicle or if you see a vehicle firsthand that's tested on a Thursday night, There's a strong possibility it's ours. If you see a vehicle that has bulkheads, that has transparent panels, and has rivets fastening this together with an electrical humming noise, there's a very strong possibility it's one of ours. But at this point, it's reached a segment of the technology where it's seamless. If the extraterrestrial vehicles are being mixed in with our man-made vehicles, you'd never tell the difference. That's how far the technology has progressed. Unequivocally, without question, that there is a black world out there. There is a black landscape that we don't know anything about, exempt from congressional oversight. It has no public scrutiny. And that is just a tip of the iceberg of what's actually there. There are dozens of programs that we still don't know about. There could actually be hundreds, but there are at least dozens of classified black budget programs that we don't know anything about. And I will refer you to a quote by President Abraham Lincoln when he stated that you can fool all of the people some of the time. You can fool some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. We're not going to be fooled anymore thinking that everything is alien. We've already proven that a lot of these are our own aircraft because of the truss beams, because of the rusty rivets, because of the electrical humming noise, because of the electric coronal that we see on the front side of the craft. That's indicative of a high voltage electrical charge. So we just won't be fooled anymore. The reason why I'm passionate about it is because it could change the world. We are between 100 and 400 years behind where we should be right now. We're living in a matrix. This is not the real world. We don't need internal combustion vehicles. We don't need coal fire plants. We don't need wind generating windmills. We don't need solar power. All of that is obsolete technology. We could be living at least 100 years beyond what we're living now. And when you can control gravity, you can control time. We could be looking at something way more advanced than we could even dream of. That's the reason why I'm into it. We could change the quality of life for everyone on this planet instantly with this technology. That's why I'm in it. And the only way that's going to happen, according to Gordon Cooper, who's our original Mercury 7 astronaut, is if the scientific community comes together as a united coalition and usurps and goes over the head of the defense contractors. And unless and until that happens, we're still going to be living in this level 1 society using these old gasoline-powered vehicles with these coal fire plants and these nuclear power generating reactors. We're going to be living in this obsolete world for the next 100, 500 years if we don't take and break away and take matters into our own hands. We've got to do it for our children, for our future generations. We've got to do it. We've already made the gravity breakthrough, according to Dr. Greer, and it's absolutely referenced in the works, that we've made the gravity breakthrough October 1954. Factor in the billions we've already spent on these programs. Over all that time period, you know they've made the breakthrough. You know that we don't need liquid rockets to get in space now. And all this stuff about the Saturn V rocket and the space shuttle using liquid rockets, we're talking about obsolete Model T Ford backwards dinosaur technology using liquid rockets. There's a better way to go to space. They made the breakthrough October 1954. In this particular sighting, there were at least 24 naval officers on the deck of the USS FDR that when they looked up above the deck of the USS FDR, they saw this craft approaching the aircraft carrier, and this thing parked itself over the flight deck. There were at least 24 naval officers who saw this, and what they saw was a at least 100-foot long cigar-shaped craft that had what were termed square windows, and then there were what were termed beings looking back at them, waving back at the aircraft carrier, people on the aircraft carrier flight deck looking back at them. So this is late 1958. This is the USS FDR. I actually tracked down the original eyewitness on this particular case, and was able to secure the paperwork, the documentation, and the original sketch. You can see the FDR here. These are the naval officers here. And you can see the box-type windows. And then this craft came down so low that the naval personnel on the deck of the aircraft carrier could actually feel the heat emanating from the craft on their faces. That's how low this thing was. And then this thing took off from their location. But there were multiple eyewitnesses. It's been confirmed. It probably was put in the logbooks. Those logbooks are no longer available, but this is a multi-witness case from credible naval officers. Many of our naval warships have been basically tracked and followed by UFOs, by USOs. At least 51% of UFO cases are, in point of fact, USO cases, unidentified submerged objects, where these craft have been seen bursting out of the ocean and flying right off into space, being tracked by radar, being scrambled, F-4 Phantoms trying to track these craft. They could not be tracked by our naval aircraft. No way. Way beyond our capability. We're talking about 1958 here technology. So who was flying these things out of the ocean? Who was, tracking our naval submarines at over 160 knots back in the 1960s? These occurrences did take place, no doubt about it. There's two reasons why they would want to keep it secret. Number one, they want to control the high ground, because anyone who controls the high ground in a battlefield environment wins that battle, no question about it. If you've got black triangles, TR-3Bs, hovering over a battlefield, monitoring the situation, and you've got military assets within those triangles, you're going to win that war. There's no question. You've got the high ground. The other reason is the propulsion system associated with these craft would essentially make all the utilities null and void. We wouldn't need coal fire plants. We wouldn't need nuclear power reactors anymore. We could tap and access the ambient zero-point energy field, and we wouldn't be metered anymore. We could do away with the oil industry. That's the other reason why they're keeping this under wraps. Those are the two reasons. What I want to show you is three cases that I have to be honest, I think we're looking at a man-made technology that people are mistaking as alien. In this case, this was seen by a woman driving home from a dinner engagement back in 1983. She heard this real loud explosion. Her car started vibrating. She pulled off to the side of the road thinking the transmission fell out. She checked the bottom of the vehicle and there was nothing wrong with her car, so she kept on going. And then off to the right in a clearing, she saw what she described as being approximately 165-foot long craft that was about 60 feet tall. It had multiple port windows in the craft. It had two sections up here with what looked like 5'10" white single-piece tight-fitting flight suit individuals that looked completely oblivious to what she was seeing from her ground location. It also had what appeared to be tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the left side of the vehicle, with a door that was closing from right to left. There was also an asphalt road section on the inner bottom section of the vehicle. And then she described what she stated were 12-inch by 12-inch square, highly polished mirrors on the bottom of it. I want to point out that she also saw inside this craft, and she termed what she saw was naval bulkheads like a shipyard. She also identified rivets holding this particular craft together. This came from the newspaper clipping. I've got the actual newspaper report here. Story behind this case: gentleman was driving to work in the morning. He saw two bright lights near his location. He actually followed these lights around the bend, and then before he knew it, he saw what he termed to be an elliptical UFO with a notch cut out of the back. It was about 65 feet across. It had two powerful beaming spotlights in the front, but then on the bottom of this craft that he could see outside his window, he saw these silencers, tubes, pipes, and cylinders like a Midas muffler plant on the bottom surface of this vehicle, and this craft slowly past his location. So now we've got 13 cases of this understructure indicative of a man-made technology. This is a case where a gentleman was driving to work in the morning. He was on a motorcycle, and all of a sudden his motorcycle stopped dead. Had no idea why. Next thing he knew, he was bathed in a white light. He looked up and saw a square hovering above his location, and there were these brilliantly lit white lights shining down on him, and he was looking at the bottom of a structure that had tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom. And as this thing passed by, he immediately identified that he wasn't looking at just the bottom square, but he was looking at, in point of fact, the bottom of a pyramid. He ended up walking his motorcycle 3 miles all the way back home. And when investigators got to him later and interviewed him about 2 weeks later, one investigator had a metal lighter that he pulled out of his pocket. And as soon as he pulled that lighter out of his pocket, it leaped out of his hand and went right to the gas tank of his motorcycle. The entire motorcycle had become magnetized. So this is just another CE2 case, because not only was it a visual, but it had a physical aspect as well. So we're no longer talking about just a CE1 case. Where you can get the reference for this is Aviation Week, Space Technology, Jane's Defense Weekly. You can go to a reference library like ASU where they have government publications, and you can read about these programs for yourself, like B2, F-117, A-12 Avenger 2. That is available to the public. It's declassified. At one time, these were deep black programs that were still within that unacknowledged special access program world, within Skunk Works, within Boeing Phantom Works, within the Northrop Black Widow group. At one time, they were super secret black. Now they're declassified. But I'm just making the point, there's so many more that we don't know about, and that's one way you can research it, by going to those university archives. But as far as those, the telltale signs of the us versus them, I mean, obviously, if you're looking at rivets, if you're looking at cross-beam girder construction, if you're looking at composite panels using quasi-crystals, using electrochromic panels, where they have the technology now, and this is a technology that's decades old now, where they can take an image of something that's in front or on the top surface of the aircraft, and they can electrically transfer that image on the bottom of the aircraft, essentially causing it to blend in with the background, making it completely invisible. Now we're talking about daytime stealth technology. They don't have to do this in nighttime anymore. They can have a craft flying directly overhead, totally silent, and you would never even know it because it's blending in with the background. They've got the technology. We're going to consider Mr. Ben Rich, who's the head of Lockheed Skunk Works between 1975 to 1991. Ben passed away in 1995. He was a good friend of Jim Goodall, who is a black aircraft researcher. And just prior to Ben's passing, Jim Goodall wrote a letter to Ben Rich asking if he would be interested in doing a non-holds-barred interview. Ben would just lay everything out that he had been working on at the Skunk Works. This meeting was agreed upon by Ben Rich. He actually agreed to do this interview. Unfortunately, Ben Rich passed away before Jim could actually interview Ben Rich on tape. However, Jim was successful in getting in one last telephone call into Mr. Ben Rich at the hospital, and Ben Rich told Jim Goodall over the phone, Jim, we have things in the Nevada desert that are 50 years beyond what you could comprehend. If you've seen it on Star Wars or Star Trek, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. That's a direct quote from Ben Rich. So we have that from the head of Lockheed Skunk Works talking about programs that are 50 years beyond what we could even comprehend. Coming from him, that's a significant statement. Now, do we have anything to back this up? We actually do. This is the Skunk Works Management Style by Ben Rich. This is AIAA technical paper published September 7th, 1988. And in this document, it makes a very interesting statement from Ben Rich. And he says here, quote, I wish I could tell you about the projects we are currently working on. They are both fascinating and fantastic. They call for technologies once only dreamed of by science fiction writers. So talking about technologies that are fascinating, fantastic, and things that only science fiction writers could dream of. So there's absolutely no telling what the skunk works could actually do, what they're capable of. Ben also stated that anything you can imagine the skunk works can do. I mean, they can do it. They have absolutely made the breakthrough. We now have the technology to take ET home. This is borne out by the technology. This is borne out by the black budget, by the 80% of programs that the skunk works is designing and working on is completely black at this time. So there's no telling just how far Lockheed and all the other defense contractors have taken this technology. They could absolutely take it beyond the moon and probably interstellar at this point. Are we interacting with alien beings? Is there a liaison? That is the $64 million question. Have we had these crash retrievals? For me personally, I take a more conservative route. I only like to stay with the nuts and bolts that we can pin down. The evidence is clear that a lot of these craft built with our tax dollars, they mimic the form, fit, and function of what are termed as extraterrestrial UFOs. To me, I just think that 95% of what is being reported as extraterrestrial UFOs are in point of fact our own deep black programs built by man-made technologies within the skunk works, within the phantom works. If there is a sighting of one of our black aircraft, be it on purpose or accidentally, in many cases the next day you'll read about that sighting in the tabloid checkout counter, right? And that is used as a diversionary tactic to keep people like you and I from looking into those aircraft. That's the tactic they've used for over 50 years. Why would they stop using it now? So that's what we're up against. We are up against the best of the best, the guys who control this technology, the defense contractors, the intelligence community, the people at the Pentagon in the procurement office that are in bed with the defense contractors. These guys are good. They'll stop at nothing to muddy the waters. That's what we're up against. False flags are as old as war itself. We have to figure out a new enemy to fight to justify spending billions of dollars for additional weapons of mass destruction. We've got to do it. Now that Saddam is gone, now that Gaddafi is gone, now that bin Laden is gone, we need a new enemy. We need a new reason to justify billions of dollars in defense contracts. So they'll invent something called nations of concern, like Carol talks about, where it's a multi-headed hydra and there's not one central place. They're all over. They're global. So this is like an ongoing war that could never be fought and never be won. This is great for defense contractors because they just keep on building more cruise missiles. It's a multi-billion-dollar bonanza. But the ultimate, and Dr. Greer talks about this, and there's a lot of reference works indicating that we could be heading in this direction now. The ultimate ace in the hole card, because when we talk about these black budget programs, in the intelligence community, they use three terms. They're called ace in the hole technologies, they're called trump card technology, and they're called silver bullet technologies. The best way to increase defense spending might be to create a false flag alien invasion using these craft that look just like alien craft, alien extraterrestrial UFOs, to fool the public into thinking we're being invaded to justify spending billions on more additional arms. This could be the ultimate arms bonanza, and we could be very close to such a scenario right now. In the mid-1990s, Lockheed merged with Martin Marietta to become Lockheed Martin. And I always thought it was interesting that of all the defense contractors that Lockheed could have merged with, they chose Martin Company, which was the company that spearheaded the gravity research in the mid-1950s. This is referenced by Nick Cook's book, Hunt for Zero Point, where he drills down really deep on Martin. They're the company that spearheaded the gravity research. So when you put the power of the Lockheed Skunk Works and you add that together with the original gravity research by Martin, you've got a superstar team. And so it's no wonder that Lockheed merged with that particular company above all others. And according to Ben Rich, anything you can imagine the Skunk Works can do. We've got the technology. Let's talk a little bit about how they keep the secrets. I'll give you an example. The Have Blue program first flew at Groom Lake, Area 51 in 1977. That program led to the F-117A stealth fighter program. That particular project was not acknowledged to the public until November the 10th of 1988. So they had successfully kept that stealth program hidden for over an entire decade before American public had any specific details on that project. So when they want to, when they really want to, they can keep a secret. One way they can keep this secret is by compartmentalizing the information. You have a contractor that builds a landing gear. You have another contractor in another state who builds a flap for a wing section. You have another contractor that builds a very specialized seat ejection system. But these guys don't get together. So no one person from those contractors knows the whole story. That's how they're able to keep the secret, by compartmentalizing the information. Talking about the Russian space shuttle, if the Russians do anything well, they are very good at copying American technology. They did that with the World War II B-29. They made an exact replica of ours that looks just like our B-29. They did the same thing with the shuttle. That flew in the 1980s. Although it did not fly manned, it did one flight that was unmanned, and I don't think it ever flew again. That was called the Buran. It's sitting in a warehouse somewhere in Russia at this time, just derelict and falling apart. So they can duplicate a lot of our technology. When you talk about these super secret, unacknowledged special access programs, by far the United States is well into the lead of this. There is no other country on earth that puts as much research and development and funding into these projects like the U.S. military Defense Department establishment. In fact, we pour so many black budget funding into these projects, we spend more than the fiscal year funding for entire countries. We're way beyond the gross national product of other countries. So yes, we are the leader, there's no question. During and after World War II, there were multiple B-29 flights over the Antarctic region, and they had all the cameras rolling where these saucer-shaped craft would come up from these ice sections and even emerge from the water and follow our B-29s with all the cameras and instruments rolling. All that was put on film and sent to some large warehouse that we've never seen. So if we wanted proof that at least some UFOs are real, the proof is there. They've got it. They've got it in the form of motion picture, high-resolution camera footage, but that footage has never been shared with the American public. I would say that what Gary allegedly stated he saw would be credible, because if it wasn't credible, why would the United States government be interested in extraditing him to America over a 10-year period? I mean, it destroyed this guy mentally. So you have to give Gary credit for that. He also talked about at least 2 craft that he discovered during his search. He talked about the USS Roscoe Hill Encoder, and he talked about the USS Curtis LeMay. So that would stand for United States Spaceship, an off-planet type secret space program. Curtis LeMay was very well into U.S. Air Force operations. They called him Bombs Away LeMay. He was instrumental in forming the B-52. So it stands to reason that out of a respect for Curtis LeMay, they would have named something after him. We don't have a U.S. aircraft carrier called the Curtis LeMay, so that may be what Gary saw with the USS Curtis LeMay. I actually believe his story. All I would reference would be that Mexican newspaper report that talked about how Admiral Byrd said that if we were in our next war, we'd have to fight an enemy that could travel from pole to pole at an incredible speed. I believe that's an honest, accurate quote, and I believe that Admiral Byrd did run into some type of craft out there. What it was, I don't know. Was it part of this Nazi breakaway group? Difficult to prove, but we've got to go back to those B-29 encounters and those motion picture film reels where there's no question they did record saucer-shaped craft following our B-29s. So there's something to that story. That comes from Wendell Stevens, who actually, on a handcuffed linkage chain to a briefcase, he carried that film to an Air Force courier, and that courier went to somewhere like Andrews Air Force Base, and this went on for many times. We've got also references that talk about how these B-29s, with all their cameras rolling, captured this footage. So the real reference to this is the late Wendell Stevens, who talked about this. And it's well known. This did take place. That represents some of the most bombshell evidence that would ever be released if they did release it. Those B-29 flights and that gun camera footage, they had electromagnetic instruments on board that recorded all of this, and there were multiple flights. If there was any question about physical evidence used to make the case for this, it would be those film reels. That could do it. It's just my personal assessment that before we can disclose the alleged extraterrestrial reality to this phenomenon, we have to disclose the man-made part of it first. I mean, doesn't that make sense that we should take and disclose and release the terrestrial end before we can jump on something that's even more exotic than that? So it's my job to track, to identify, to disclose to the best of my ability the man-made nuts and bolts military aerospace defense contractor end of this, because these vehicles can be mistaken many times for something that we think might be an extraterrestrial vehicle. And the only way that I know of to do that is to interview the Lockheed Skunk Works engineers, interview the test pilots, drill down on the university archives, get into the Aviation Week articles, and track the historical research and the legacy of the gravity research and how that started in the mid-1950s and has gone all the way to today. And looking at the funding, looking at all the defense contractors, points you into the direction of multiple defense contractors building these saucer, triangular, and boomerang-shaped craft that look just like extraterrestrial UFOs, but our own man-made vehicles, and that's what I've endeavored to do. It could potentially be a beautiful future. It will be a non-polluting future. It'll be a future with beautiful rivers, lakes, and oceans, and it'll be a future where we go exo-interplanetary. We're not going to be just confined to Earth. We're going to go to the planets. We're going to go to the outer solar system. We're going to go beyond and make this interstellar, and we're going to populate other planets around other solar systems. No question about it. We have to do it. We're going to do it. Phoenix Lights, that's March 13th, 1997. Seen by thousands of people in the Phoenix area. Certainly got right into this Phoenix Sky Harbor airspace, but I want to point out that the sighting actually started in Nevada at around 7:55 p.m., made its way all the way down to Tucson later that evening. Now, how do flares go from Nevada all the way down to Tucson? Flares only describe part of the Phoenix Lights. Now, this was a Thursday night, March 13th, 1997. This is the configuration that was seen by Tim Lee over his house. It was such a low type flyover that he said he could hit it with a baseball. That's how low it was. National Geographic Channel came back later, interviewed him. They actually did a laser target designator GPS measurement. They came down within plus or minus 10 feet. This thing was 1,500 feet across. That's how big this was. And that could be a holographic projection. That's one thing that we need to consider. I have an illustration here that was done by a good friend of mine, Tom Bogan. He's got to get the credit for this. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the most detailed, minute-by-minute, illustrative timestamp illustration that you ever see of the Phoenix Lights craft. There is no one who's done a better job than Tom Bogan. As you can see here, it started up at 8:15 over here in Paulden, Nevada, worked its way down 8:30 at Sunset Point, came over here 8:45, continuing to move south over here by the South Mountain, 9 o'clock, and it actually finished up here 9:30 p.m. in Tucson. You can see the flares in this location. So bottom line is, flares do not explain the entire sighting of the Phoenix Lights, March 13th, 1997. Now, we also have another document to consider as well, and that comes in the form of this document right here. This is the Air Force 2025 report, and this is a wish list of what the U.S. Air Force would see. They would like to see this implemented by the year 2025. And as you go through this document, they have all these different configurations, different technologies they'd like to see. But I want to bring your attention to this particular technology right here. It isn't talked about too much, but it is section 5.6, airborne holographic projector. And I'll just read the narrative here. It says the holographic projector displays a three-dimensional visual image in a desired location removed from the display generator. The projector can be used for psychological operations and strategic perception management. It is also useful for optical deception and cloaking, providing a momentary distraction when engaging an unsophisticated adversary. So, is this a possible Rosetta Stone for the Phoenix Lights craft? Talking about an airborne holographic projector, something that could be projected from another aircraft flying in the vicinity. This is something that we need to consider on the Phoenix Lights craft. And I say that because many of the eyewitnesses who saw that vehicle on March 13th, 1997, hover directly over the location, stated that the craft had fuzzy edges. They weren't sharp. That might be indicative of a holographic image projection technology, which is borne out by the 2025 report. Okay, so let's look at this really quickly. When we talk about the military-industrial complex, the aerospace end of the military-industrial complex, we're talking about something called Aerospace Alley. That is from San Diego all the way up toward the Los Angeles basin, heading northeast on the 14 to Lancaster, Palmdale, going to the Mojave Edwards Air Force Base. That's the corridor that we're talking about. Now, what is the heart of that aerospace complex? It is Air Force Plant 42, which I've got a map here showing you the direction and how to get there. Take 14 north. This will take you to Lancaster, Palmdale. This is Air Force Plant 42. This, ladies and gentlemen, is where the action takes place at this location. Over the years, McDonnell Douglas has had a laboratory here. Lockheed absolutely has a facility here. Rockwell has a facility here where they built the space shuttle. Northrop has a facility. Boeing has a facility. But for this particular discussion, we want to focus in on the Lockheed plant, and that's this detailed layout right here. This is Plant 10, the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it's been stated that 80% of what the Skunk Works does is completely classified. So it's not known to the general public what they do, but that takes place in this building complex right here. Building 601 is one of the primary facilities where sub-assemblies of these aircraft are put together. So this is just a brief overview. Air Force Plant 42, Lockheed Skunk Works Plant 10 is within that section. This is where the action takes place. A-12 Avenger 2, as we mentioned before, this is a McDonnell Douglas General Dynamics program. It was canceled by Dick Cheney in 1991 at the cost of $5 billion to taxpayers. There's absolutely nothing left of the A-12 program. Despite all that money, it's all gone. It's like a total waste. And this is just kind of a poster child for how these programs, when they're basically, they tried to make this a fixed price contract, but the cost overruns went out of control. They eventually canceled the program. What about the programs we don't know about? A12 is just an example of one that we do. What about the programs that we don't know about that got shoved under the carpeting? We could be talking about billions of dollars that have been wasted that could have actually helped American citizens in the economy. It could have improved the education. It could have retrofitted our infrastructure. Something to consider. But again, A12 Avenger 2, $5 billion down the drain. All right, how do we track the funding? How do we track the funding? This was a watershed article. Detroit Free Press. Secret ledger hides military projects. Pentagon black budget has tripled under the Reagan administration. So, how do we track the black budget? What can we as a taxpayer do to see where our money is being hidden? Well, you as a taxpayer can walk right into the Library of Congress. You can go up to the reference librarian and you can request something called RDT&E Programs R1. That stands for Research Development, Test and Evaluation Programs R1, Department of Defense. And you can go through this rather boring and wordy document here. And on the left-hand side, you see the program element number and then the item description and the funding, how much they poured into that program. So the bottom line is you take the total amount and you subtract the knowns, and what you're left with are the unknowns or the black budget programs. That's how you can track these projects. Now, they don't give you specific details of what the project is, but you as a taxpayer can walk right into the Library of Congress. You can request this document and they'll give it to you. And that's one way that you can figure out where your tax dollars are disappearing to over the last 40 years. Every January, this is handed to Congress. This is the unclassified version. They get a classified version. We as taxpayers, we get an unclassified version. Let's go back to the, I've got the breakdown on this. I've got the blow-up chart on this. But in this particular case, you can see this is the federal spending by category, and they break it down to each department. So on the left-hand side, you see that during the beginning of the Reagan administration in 1981, the black budget increased by just over $500 million. By 1988, it increased by $9.122 billion. Here's federal spending by category. The Pentagon's black budget was $35 billion for fiscal year 1988. Transportation was $28 billion. Education was $25 billion. So we're spending more on classified black budgets funding programs than we are for education. Total procurement funding for the Air Force for fiscal year 1988 was $51.1 billion, of which $19.1 billion were black budget programs for fiscal year 1988. And it has just gone up from that point forward. It has just exponentially grown from the end of the Reagan administration. We're talking about billions of dollars being filtered into these black programs. Now, we need to talk about one program in specific that is close to my heart, because this is a tremendous amount of research has gone. This is basically a world exclusive here. We're talking about a program that had its beginnings basically immediately after the Challenger explosion, January 28th, 1986, where we lost these 7 Challenger astronauts with Krista McCullough, who was the teacher. At that point, the Air Force lost what they termed their assured access to space, because as we know, the shuttle program is in point of fact not a civilian operation, but is in point of fact a military application, because at least 70% of payloads within the shuttle are classified DoD satellites, things that are operated by the National Reconnaissance Office, like high-resolution monitoring satellites, keyhole satellites. That's the kind of things that were launched within the shuttle. Now, when the shuttle exploded, when Challenger exploded January 28th, 1986, they lost their assured access to space, and they started launching these satellites on Titan boosters. But something weird happened. Concurrently with the Challenger explosion, there were multiple Titan booster explosions as well. So the Air Force, the DoD, they were totally out of business. And so a desperate cry went to the defense contractors, including Lockheed, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, and Rockwell. And they basically stated, we need you to design for us a rapid response two-stage to orbit space plane that they can build quickly, very quickly. Something that could go into a low Earth orbit, that could launch depleted uranium rods from God, or also launch a very high-resolution spy satellite, a very small, high-resolution spy satellite. And what they ended up building was a two-stage to orbit space plane. And what you're looking at here is an event that took place at Holloman Air Force Base, where a modified C-5 Galaxy with what they call chipmunk cheek extensions was seen being unloaded from a C-5 Galaxy. There was a tarp on the parasitic aircraft that had 4 linear aerospike engines on the back side of the vehicle, with this grid or vent part on the aft section of the nozzle of the linear aerospike engines. Here is the detailed drawing of what was termed Speedy, part of the Black Star program. It was called the XOV, or Experimental Orbital Vehicle. It came in 2 sizes. There was a 60 to 65 foot version and also a 95 foot version. It has 4 linear aerospike engines that are grouped in 2 banks on the aft side of the vehicle. The bottom surface here was completely composed of space shuttle tiles. So just think of these black space shuttle tiles on the bottom of the vehicle. It also had these channels that were kind of milled into the bottom of the craft to direct airflow and to increase the strength of the vehicle. This is the section here where the Q bay was that launched these satellites. And then I also want to mention that the nose gear had what we believe 4 standard bogies for the nose gear, and then it had a skid for the main gear, and then outrigger pogos for kind of a supporting structure on the outrigger section of the landing gear. So that's the Speedy XOV. Now the mothership that actually launches that aircraft is this aircraft right here. This is the what's termed the Elegant Lady, or Black Star space plane mothership. It looks very much like the vintage 1960s XB-70, but the primary difference being that the vertical stabilizers on the XB-70 have now been moved out to the wingtips as winglets, and then it has a forward and aft retracting canard with winglets on there. Here's a bottom view here. So this is section AA. If you go to section AA, you can see the relieved section of the bottom of the XB-70 mothership has a section which is allowing the parasitic aircraft to fit up inside. So basically picture an ice cream scooper taking out the bottom of the XB-70 vehicle, allowing for this parasitic aircraft to fit conformally on the bottom of this craft, and that is airdropped when they're basically getting their operation going. And so this is the Black Star 2-stage to orbit spaceplane transportation system. Bill Scott has to get credit for doing the legwork and actually breaking this story in Aviation Week Space Technology. So this is just a brief overview of the Black Star program. So what we've got here is kind of a brief overview, a collage of aircraft that I mentioned have been tested, designed, and built within the military-industrial complex. That's the Reagan years between 1981 to 1989. A tremendous amount of black aircraft research was done in the black world within that time frame. That's extremely important to keep in mind because that's when these things really started getting funding. We can start here on the left-hand side and we'll work our way down here. But before we begin, our story actually begins in 1974 with a DARPA-funded program called Harvey. This is Project Harvey, was a procurement program by the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency to design, build, and test fly a low observable stealth aircraft that could sneak in under the radar screen of enemy radar and basically hit their target and come in and return safely. Now that was something very difficult to do back in 1974 because this was an emerging technology. Okay, what I've done is I've built a scale model here. They eventually identified 2 aerospace contractors. This is Northrop and Lockheed for this Project Harvey competition. Lockheed eventually won the program with their Have Blue design, which eventually came into the existence of the F-117A stealth fighter. But Northrop's version, which is a lot less known, was a program called Project XST, Experimental Survivable Testbed. And although they didn't make it into production, they did build basically a 1-to-1 scale radar cross-section model. This is a replica of that model. And you can see it's got this diamond configuration. It's got the faceted flat plates, just like on the F-117A, and then it's got these twin inward canted vertical stabilizers. It also has an air intake on top of the fuselage of the aircraft, although Lockheed's Have Blue featured an air intake on either side of the pilot's compartment. So the concept being, if you have an enemy radar that strikes this aircraft, in a regular standard Tier 1 type aircraft, the radar return would go directly back to the origin point. That's exactly what you don't want to happen. In this design, you've got faceted flat plates that are at an angle. So when the radar is transmitted toward the aircraft, it bounces and reflects away from the origin point, so it doesn't show up as an echo on the radar from the enemy. And that's what you want in a stealth aircraft. Anytime you deal with government spending, the first rule in government spending is why build one when you can build two at twice the price. So I went ahead and built a 2X size version of the Northrop XST, exact same configuration, but just twice as large. Here you can see the overhead air intake, the faceted flat plate technology, the diamond configuration for the wing platform, and the twin inward canted vertical stabilizer. Neutral and non-biased. That's our job. That's our mandate. So we have to eliminate every terrestrial explanation before saying that something is possibly extraterrestrial. And that's what I've tried to do with this research, tracking the test pilots, tracking the engineers, tracking the procurement funding, the black world, what they've been doing in the black world the past 50 years. That's my goal. We are now going to move on to the Hudson Valley Boomerang. That's between 1982 and 1989, where 25,000 eyewitnesses saw a gigantic boomerang V-shaped aircraft hover over the Taconic State Parkway, over populated areas, over freeways, over reservoirs, ponds, lakes, and rivers. We're talking about probably the most significant UFO sighting in ufology, period. Just on numbers alone, the Hudson Valley Wave represents a gigantic UFO sighting. Now we'll start here at this beginning part here. What people are reporting is something that is as large as a football field, a massive boomerang V-shaped craft that had what the eyewitnesses term, quote, tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the vehicle. Many of the eyewitnesses also reported that on the bottom of the craft, when this thing was hovering over the Taconic State Parkway, they saw what looked like transparent panels where you could look up inside the craft, revealing what they termed a cross beam and girder construction, like a truss bridge. So that's very interesting bottom structure. Also, people who were under this craft and actually saw this vehicle stated that when it had these flashing lights, the lights would flash in sequence. They weren't haphazard, but they went off where the reds would go off, then the blues would go off, then the greens would go off, then the whites would go off, then the yellows would go off. And this would go up and down the wings, so it was an intent for the light pattern. There was a sequence for the light pattern. Here you can see an enlargement of the crossbeam and girder construction, and this is the different configurations of the lighting pattern. But bottom line is, we're talking about 25,000 eyewitnesses over an approximate 10-year period who saw this massive silent craft. Now, I've built a model here. This particular craft was seen in 1983 by a woman named Monique O'Driscoll near Kent, New York. Her daughter, also named Monique, was with her as well. This particular craft passed directly over her vehicle. She was looking outside the windshield as this thing passed over, and it parked itself over a frozen lake. So there was ice on the bottom. This thing did a 180-degree flat turn and had all these flashing lights on the bottom that she could see reflecting on the ice below. So we're not talking about ultralights here. We're not talking about planes flying in formation. Now, one way we know that is because according to the FAA regulations, ultralights are prohibited from flying a half an hour after sunset. Many of the Hudson Valley boomerang sightings were 9:30, 10:30 p.m. or later, so we can rule out ultralights. But the point I want to make is when these craft made a turn, they did not bank like a B-2 stealth bomber. They did this absolute flat 180-degree turn where all the lights remain equidistant as this thing turned. Now I'm going to move on to another one here. Particularly what was seen over the Taconic State Parkway on March the 24th, 1983. Now keep in mind, that's exactly 24 hours after Ronald Reagan gave his address to the nation pitching the SDI or Star Wars program. So I'm asking the question, is there a tie-in between Star Wars SDI and what was seen exactly 24 hours later on a Thursday night? We could be looking at a tie-in here. Here you can see the multicolored lights, you can see the composite panels, and what I want to stress is the fact that when this aircraft turned, it was parking itself over the Taconic State Parkway, and I've got a map here showing you how on the March 24th, 1983, it was heading north from Millwood all the way up to Yorktown Heights, and it was zigzagging as it was going up the Taconic State Parkway. Now keep in mind, this is absolutely dead silent at treetop level. We're not talking about planes flying in formation here. This thing was bold. It was arrogant. It was brazen. It didn't care who saw it. It was going to go where it wanted, when it wanted. So it was a very arrogant type flight path. Now, the point I want to make is when it parked itself over the Taconic State Parkway, and you can see the bottom view here, when it turned, it made this flat turn 180 degrees with absolutely no bank angle. You just can't get that with standard aerodynamics. You're not going to get that with planes flying in formation, so we can rule out the plane theory. Okay, so we'll start up here on the left-hand corner. This is a scale model built by Tony Gonzalez, who's unfortunately no longer with us. But he's the one who first proposed the possible tie-in between the original stealth bomber configuration and the redesign after 1983. Here you can see the original configuration of the B-2 stealth bomber with a single triangle trailing edge. And then after 1983, at the cost of $1 billion per taxpayer to the taxpayers, they redesigned the wing to the familiar double W or sawtooth trailing edge that we see today. Now, this pre-1983 design is exactly what the Hudson Valley boomerang eyewitnesses are reporting. A boomerang shape with a triangle trailing edge. Exactly what they're reporting. He's even got the composite panels where you can see up inside the aircraft. So this is Tony Gonzalez model here. Again, this is the tubes, pipes, and cylinders. A lot of the eyewitnesses stated that this craft looked like an inverted Midas muffler shop with all these pipes, all these cylinders. The same tubes, pipes, and cylinders were seen on the bottom of the Belgium Triangle in 1989-1990. The same tubes, pipes, and cylinders were also identified on the January 5th, 2000 Southern Illinois Triangle case, which we'll examine as well. Kent, New York, February 26, 1983. That's the one with Monique O'Driscoll, who saw this parked over a frozen pond. It made newspapers all around the world. In 1984, they had a conference with over 1,000 people in attendance. ABC News was there, CBS News was there, NBC News was there. Multiple eyewitnesses were interviewed. Questions fly over Putnam. Hundreds claim to have seen UFO. Local UFOs called historical and interesting. Absolutely, they are historical and interesting. Multiple sightings in New York. Now, on July 24th, 1984, an absolutely massively significant sighting took place over the Indian Point nuclear power plant. This is July 24th, 1984, and this is in Buchanan, New York. And on that night, right around 9:30, 10:30 time frame, a massive 900-foot long boomerang triangular aircraft parked itself over Reactor 3 at the Indian Point nuclear power plant for approximately 20 minutes with 12 security guards who had shotguns pointed at this thing with their mouths wide open, were absolutely shocked by what they saw. Now, we have it on very good authority from one of the security guards that was present at this event, that one security guard who was in one of these adjacent buildings was recording all this on videotape, and he said that, quote, this craft was so large he had to pan the camera 180 degrees to get the whole thing in frame. That's how big this thing crap was. So at the very least, there is a videotape of this in existence, but we don't have it. It was confiscated later. This is a couple of illustrations of what this craft looked like on the bottom. This is over the Taconic State Parkway on the lower section here. Now, many eyewitnesses reported seeing that this craft had a very powerful spotlight that was shining down on the cars below. This is March 24th, 1983. So again, we're not talking about ultralights in formation. Again, you see the multicolored lights in this location here, and the tubes, pipes, and cylinders with a very mechanical understructure. We'll consider a couple of the different newspaper clippings here. Valley UFO sighting, spark interest. Lower Hudson UFO. This also took place near the Danbury, Connecticut area here. So we've got a multi-state sighting within the Hudson Valley boomerang. UFO or B2. That was done by Tony Gonzalez, who traveled around that 3-state region giving lectures on his proposal and the possibility of the connection between the Hudson Valley boomerang original pre-1983 design and what was procured under SDI funding. This is the original configuration here, and then moving on to the after or post-1983 connection. So, just to sum up on the Hudson Valley boomerang, at the very least, we're talking about 25,000 eyewitnesses, an entire cross-section of society, test pilots, engineers, lawyers, doctors, air traffic controllers, all credible witnesses describing an incredible, massive boomerang-shaped craft that hovers silently, has multicolored flashing lights, and can make this 180-degree flat turn, which may be something funded under the SDI program. And no discussion about classified aircraft would be complete without talking about the triangles. Black triangles have been seen all around the world. The modern-day sightings of triangles, repeat, modern-day sightings, basically got kicked off around 1974. But what we want to focus in on is this group of sightings right here, 1989, 1990. The absolute pinnacle of those sightings is the Belgium Triangle Wave, 1989, 1990, where upwards of 10,000 people reported a gigantic triangular-shaped aircraft that they stated was about 2 times the size of a football field, in some cases as large as an aircraft carrier. We're talking about a massive craft that had the same flight characteristics of the Hudson Valley boomerang. It was a very silent configuration. It had a white light at each of the corner that you can see in this Sun newspaper article, July 23rd, 1991, and then one red or amber light in the middle section of the triangle. But they also had tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the aircraft. Many of the eyewitnesses reported an electrical humming noise, like kind of a machine operating in the background. Also, eyewitnesses indicated that they heard what they termed a sound like a sewing machine too. That was also heard in the Hudson Valley boomerang. People who were just adjacent to this particular aircraft said that they could see what looked like windows on the side of the craft, and this craft had the capability of basically dropping totally steady into a hover and then going from horizon to horizon and back again in less than 1 second. So we're not talking about standard aerodynamics here. This craft was confirmed on 5 separate radars, which is the 2 F-16s that were scrambled, which you can see here. This is 1990 on March 30th when 2 F-16s were scrambled, and then 3 ground-based radars also confirmed a hard target. So when you've got 3 ground-based and 2 air-based targets confirmed on radar, you've got something real here. We're not talking about something fictitious. Now, moving over here, you can see different configurations of the triangle. I've included a very detailed drawing of something that was seen in Madison, Wisconsin on November 22nd, 1985. a very interesting triangular configuration that had these tubes, pipes, and cylinders crisscrossing on the bottom of the aircraft. And I'll just read very quickly what the eyewitness stated here. It says, quote, "The underside of the craft resembled the back of a refrigerator, like a collection of condensation pipes that ran back and forth." Now, we need to ask ourselves, is this something that you would expect to see on an alien spacecraft? In fact, I built a model of this craft, and you can see this is what the bottom of this particular vehicle looked like, with all these pipes running back and forth. Again, this very mechanical understructure was also seen on the Hudson Valley Boomerang between 1983, 82 time period, all the way up to 1989. This is the case for November 22nd, 1985. So the sightings have absolutely continued. Now we're going to consider this particular case. This was seen by a group of 4 individuals around 9:30 p.m. This is Monks Kirby, England. This is 1999, March the 31st. When they were returning from a dinner outing, what they actually saw were red lights on the left side of the road, off on a 25-degree angle. There were 4 red lights. As they got closer, they noticed that these red lights were connected to what looked like a diamond configuration. And what you see here, when you have a nose down configuration, you'll actually see this smaller light here, and they did identify that. As they got closer to this vehicle, they saw that these lights were connected to some type of a craft. As they further got close to this craft, which was not too far off the surface of the ground, this particular vehicle made a very interesting maneuver. It looked like it was underwater. That's the testimony by Colin Saunders, who's the primary eyewitness. This thing did a 90-degree rotation, but it did it as it was looking like it was underwater. It was a very smooth rotation, and the pivot point was the back of the craft itself. It wasn't the center axis of the vehicle, but it rotated from the bottom and came up. He also identified on the top surface kind of like a liquid mercury shimmering effect that was on the top surface and bottom surface of this vehicle. It also was composed of these box-like raised structures that, in his opinion, were kind of a docking mechanism to a much larger wing-shaped craft that flew not too long after this was sighted. So again, this is the Colin Saunders Flying Triangle, Monks Kirby, England, March 31st, 1999. This was seen by one particular gentleman who was coming back from a music concert. This is Barnsley, England, August 25th, 1990. As he was exiting this concert, there was a lot of cars in his way, so it took him a while to get going. But as he was driving home, he looked out his window and he saw emerging from this dark, misty cloud a massive triangular-shaped aircraft that was approximately 200 feet per side. It had windows on the side of the vehicle, but then on the bottom of the craft, he saw what looked like cross-beam and girder construction, which is the same structure that we heard about on the Hudson Valley Boomerang. There was one light on the corner of the vehicle, identical to the Belgium Triangle wave, and then another white light here in the center. But he said that when he was seeing this craft, he saw what looked like human beings, test pilots, looking back at him. And he said that there was nothing about these pilots or humans looking at him through these windows that gave him the impression that it was anything other than just human pilots, reinforcing his belief that this was a military project. So this is another one of these mechanical understructures that we've seen. I've gotten at least 12 separate cases of this very interesting mechanical structure on the bottom of the vehicle. This was seen by Maureen Davis. This is November 1985 in Yorktown Heights, New York, right at the height of the Hudson Valley Boomerang wave. She was waiting at a bus stop for her husband, and she witnessed a massive 75-degree isosceles black flying triangle hovering not too far from her location, a massive craft. And when she was interviewed by Linda Zimmerman, who is a very good researcher on the Hudson Valley wave, she was stated that this particular craft was not as big as a football field. It was as big as a football stadium. That's how large this craft was. Now, what's interesting about her sighting is she got under this vehicle and was able to look up inside the craft itself. She said that there was an opening that just sort of appeared, and then a red orb came up and went inside that opening, and she saw what looked like terraced apartment complexes with multiple lights connected to each floor. And so this was her sighting. This is November of 1985 at the height of the Hudson Valley boomerang wave. Now, we're going to move on to January 5th, 2000, which is the Southern Illinois Triangle case. This was seen by at least 3 police officers in multiple counties. Lebanon was seen in Summerfield. It was seen in Shiloh, Millstop, Dupo. This is about 25 miles east of St. Louis. And what they observed were at least 3 different triangular configurations and one particular craft that looked like a single-story ranch with a penthouse on top. Primary eyewitness was a miniature golf course owner and truck driver by the name of Melvin Knoll, and he saw this about a quarter mile away from his location, and this craft was just silently flying by. He said that this thing had multiple lighted colored windows on the side of the craft and then a lighted penthouse on top, flying silently near his location. He said that this particular craft was about a football field in size. Other eyewitnesses, who include the police officers, stated that the bottom of the acute triangle craft had a very mechanical understructure, but he said in this case it looked like stacked Legos with tubes sticking down. And these craft also made these very interesting maneuvers where they were just hovering silently and then they shot away like a spark off a grinding wheel and left no sonic boom. So again, we're talking about an exotic type propulsion system. This is a actual scale model that was done by a firefighter who actually saw this vehicle as well. So we've got multiple eyewitnesses to this triangular and box-like rectangular craft. This is January 5th, 2000 for that particular case. Now we'll also consider this particular case. This is the Flying Truss Bridge. I got this from the QFOS archives. This is March 5th, 2003. It had been buried in the QFOS archives for years, may have never seen the light of day if I wasn't fortunate enough to gain access to the QFOS archives and pull it out. But this particular individual, and I have his multi-page report and technical drawing, he stated here that as this massive football field in length triangle flew over his house, it rumbled the house so severely that it knocked pictures off the wall. That's how much of a frequency this thing left. But what I want to bring your attention to is this truss beam cross girder construction. And he stated that it looked like this particular craft was fastened by rivets from a bridge, like the George Washington Bridge or even the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And again, he stated that this thing was fastened, what he stated were these rusty rivets from a bridge. So I'm asking the question, is this an alien spacecraft that we're talking about here? We are looking at a man-made technology. We can see that from the funding, multiple billions of dollars have been run into these programs. They have no congressional oversight. They have no public scrutiny. A lot of these aircraft may, in point of fact, be funded under the Star Wars SDI program stemming from the 1983 address to the nation on March 23rd. And we could be looking in some of these cases of these boomerang, these triangles, of a airborne, mobile, over-the-horizon radar system that is impervious to Russian ICBM attacks. And that's something that we really need to consider. That could be one explanation for these triangles. So that's just a brief overview of some of the flying triangles that have been seen all around the world, stemming from at least 1974. The only thing that I would recommend to others in this field, the general public, people maybe watching this, is according to the Declaration of Independence by our founding forefathers, it is our constitutional right, it is our constitutional obligation to question authority. So we have every right to question where our tax dollars are disappearing. We have a right to demand an accounting from our congressional leaders. It's in our original mandate to do so. So you shouldn't feel embarrassed to ask about these programs. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Our documents that you can get from the Library of Congress, our own documents prove that we should have an accounting on a yearly basis of these programs. Yet that's not done because we only get the unclassified version of that classified budget. So a lot more of these programs should actually see the light of day, and that technology needs to be declassified and handed into the scientific community.